Welcome to the deep dive. We sort through the noise, we look at the sources, and we pull out the key insights just for you. Today we're tackling a question that, well, it really gets to the heart of education, doesn't it? What actually makes a great teacher? Is it some kind of innate talent, something you're born with? Or is it more like a craft, a set of skills you can learn and practice?
It's a huge question, and one that sparks a lot of debate, definitely fueled by passion, but also by pragmatism. And today we're doing a deep dive into one of the most influential and, yeah, often pretty controversial attempts to answer that, Doug Lemov's Teach Like a Champion, TLAC. And this isn't some abstract theory book. Its roots are deep in the high-stakes reality of high-performing urban charter schools.
Okay, so our mission today sounds pretty ambitious. We're going to unpack the core ideas, look at how it's changed over the years through different editions, and frankly, get into the weeds with both the praise and the really passionate criticisms it's received. We want to figure out where it fits in the bigger picture of education philosophy, using all the sources you shared to give you that full, rounded view.
And yeah, to really get TLAC, you have to start with where it came from. Doug Lemov, he was a teacher, a principal. He's now a managing director at Uncommon Schools. That's a big network of public charter schools, started back in '97. Their whole mission is about closing that opportunity gap for kids from low-income backgrounds. So Lemov spent just countless hours watching the most effective teachers in that network. The ones getting amazing results, often measured by state tests. And through watching them, really closely, he started to identify and codify these instructional brushstrokes, he called them. These little moves, the subtle things that set great teachers apart.
Right, so TLAC isn't just a general teaching guide. It's deeply tied to this specific no excuses charter school movement. A context really laser focused on getting underserved students ready for college, not just graduating.
You've nailed it. That's the core idea.
Yeah.
And that origin story, in a lot of ways, is where the central conflict around it comes from. For people who support it, TLAC is this incredibly practical, empowering, immediately usable toolbox. It gives teachers, new ones and veterans, really concrete things they can do right away to manage their classrooms better, get kids engaged, make the work more rigorous. It even gives educators a shared language, a way to talk about their craft with real precision.
But then there's the flip side, a really strong counter-narrative. Critics see it very differently, not as a neutral toolbox at all. They often describe it as a rigid system, ideologically driven, one that prioritizes maybe compliance over critical thinking, uniformity over, say, student creativity or cultural identity. It sounds like a fundamental disagreement about what education is for.
That's exactly right. And this critical view often frames TLAC as, potentially a tool for social control, especially in communities of color. They might see it as training what the sociologist Joran Golan called worker learners, students who learn to wait for instructions, defer to authority, maybe at the expense of finding their own voice. So for you listening, really grappling with this tension, is it a practical toolbox or a rigid system? That's crucial for understanding its impact and the debates. As we go through this, we'll look at the core techniques, how it changed from version 1.0 to 3.0, the big arguments around autonomy, equity, evidence, and where it lands on that spectrum between direct instruction and more progressive learning. It's quite a journey.
Okay, let's start digging in with part one, the taxonomy of champion teaching. It's important, like you said, to see TLAC not just as a list of tips. It's this really organized system, right? A catalog of techniques designed to get specific results. We'll start with how it tries to set really high expectations.
Yeah, the basic idea is simple but kind of profound. Lemov argues that student achievement mirrors the expectations teachers communicate. And not just by saying, I believe in you, it's through very specific, consistent actions that shape the whole academic culture. These techniques, especially the high expectations ones, they work together. It's a system.
So it's not just about the words, it's the actions. Showing belief through the day-to-day stuff, the classroom routines.
Precisely. The system is designed to kind of dismantle that unspoken agreement you sometimes see, where a kid says, I don't know, and gets off the hook, or where getting part of the answer right is good enough. TLAC tries to rewire those norms. These first four techniques we'll talk about, they're like interlocking gears, designed to shift what students expect learning to feel like. It creates a really demanding environment, which we should acknowledge also raises flags for some critics about its impact on students from different cultural backgrounds. We'll definitely circle back to that.
Okay, let's jump into the first one. No opt-out. This sounds like it tackles passive disengagement head-on, where a student tries to just check out. You're saying it requires every student to eventually give the right answer. No more, I don't know, escape hatch.
It's probably one of Lemov's most well-known techniques. And yeah, it makes that common scene student shrugs, says, I don't know, teacher moves on. It makes that obsolete. No opt-out sets a baseline. Everyone's responsible for the content. Disengaging isn't an option. But, crucially, it's meant to be supportive, not a gotcha. Lemov outlines 4 ways to make sure the original student gets there. 1, the teacher gives the answer, student repeats it. 2, another student gives the answer, first student repeats it. 3, the teacher gives a cue or a hint. Or 4, another student provides that cue.
So the main thing isn't just getting the answer out there, but making sure the first student says it correctly, with support if needed.
Exactly. The interaction has to end with the initial student nailing the answer. And it's framed as the teacher believing they can do it. The cues could be anything: examples, rules, the first step of a problem. For older students, maybe just repeating isn't enough, so you extend it. Ask a follow-up. Good, now give me another example. Or, why is that true? The goal is building confidence, reinforcing that everyone's an active player here.
Okay, that connects really well to the second technique,
Okay.
right? This sounds like it builds on no opt-out by insisting on a really high standard of correctness. It tackles that teacher habit of, like, rounding up a partially correct answer. The student says the Montagues and Capulets don't get along, and the teacher jumps in with, right, they don't get along, and it's a generational feud.
Your example is perfect. It shows how subtle that rounding up can be. The teacher just did the heavy lifting there, right? And accepted a lower standard. Right is right says, nope, only fully correct answers get the nod. It's not about being harsh on near misses. It's about consistently showing students you believe they can hit the highest standard. Lemov breaks it down. Hold out for all the way. Praise the effort, but make it clear it's not quite there yet. Guide them to finish. Answer the question. Gently redirect students who answer a different, easier question. And really importantly, use technical vocabulary. Pushing for precise academic language, not just everyday terms. It's all about cultivating intellectual rigor.
And even when they get it right, the learning isn't over. That brings us to stretch it. This sounds like it extends the learning beyond just one right answer. The reward for being right is another question.
Exactly. It serves 2 really vital functions. First, it checks if they really understand it or if it was just a lucky guess. Second, and maybe more important, it pushes students from simple recall into deeper, more complex thinking on the spot. A teacher might ask, how did you figure that out? Or, is there another way to solve it? Or ask for evidence from the text, or tell them to use a specific vocab word, or ask how a character might react in a totally different situation. It's a great way to differentiate, tailoring questions to push each student. But, it takes good judgment. You don't want to completely derail the lesson or discourage a student who isn't quite ready for that leap. It's a bit of a balancing act.
Right. And the last one in this high expectations group is format matters. This moves beyond just the content to how answers are delivered, the form, the style, which Lemov argues is key for college and beyond.
Absolutely. The idea is preparing kids for success means more than just knowing stuff. It's communicating ideas clearly, professionally. Format Matters pushes for things like complete sentences, not just fragments, constant low-stakes practice in formal speech. It demands correct grammar. Often the teacher just repeats the error back as a question, like, we was walking, prompting self-correction. It helps internalize formal English. And audibility, making sure everyone can hear, which values every contribution and makes listening an expectation too. Like the others, it's meant to be quick, minimal disruption, often using established cues. It just reinforces that every detail matters.
That makes total sense. Okay, so we have these high expectations set. How does Lemov then make sure the classroom environment supports that rigor efficiently? Let's talk about the classroom engineering side.
Yeah, the driving idea here is that instructional time is incredibly precious, like the most valuable resource there is. So a big chunk of TLAC is about techniques that literally engineer the classroom for maximum efficiency, minimum disruption. These aren't just random management tricks. They're systematic ways to build a culture where routines are automatic, transitions are smooth, and behavior is managed proactively, all aimed at clawing back every possible minute for learning.
And this connects to cognitive science, right? This is where the why it works comes in more clearly.
Absolutely. And Lemov really leans into this more in the later editions. These techniques are designed to cut down on cognitive load for everyone. Think about it. A classroom is demanding. Kids constantly decide how to enter, pass papers, switch activities. Each little decision eats up working memory. By making procedures automatic, like with entry routine or tight transitions, you take them off the conscious mental plate. This lines up perfectly with TLAC 3.0's idea that habits accelerate learning by freeing up brain power for complex stuff. Same with behavior management. The goal is quick correction, minimal disruption, get back to learning fast. So efficiency isn't just control, it's optimizing the brain for learning. Now, this does raise a really interesting tension. Does optimizing efficiency this way, imposing routines externally, maybe hinder kids developing their own internal self-regulation skills? That's a key critique we'll get to.
That's a really crucial point. How do the TLAC foes argue it doesn't get in the way of self-regulation? Or is there a trade-off they acknowledge?
Well, they'd likely argue it's not really a trade-off, but more like a necessary first step. By explicitly teaching and making these behaviors routine, students actually learn what self-regulation looks like in practice. They experience the benefits of an organized approach. The argument is you can't effectively self-regulate if you don't even know the target behavior or how to do it consistently. So the explicit instruction provides the scaffolding. True self-regulation can develop later, once that initial cognitive load is handled. It's about building the habits first.
Got it. Building the muscle before running the race.
Okay.
So let's look at routines and transitions. I can definitely see how lost minutes on logistics pile up.
Oh, they pile up into hours, even days over a school year, seriously. So these champion teachers Lemov watched, they had super efficient standard procedures. Entry routine and do now are classic examples. Kids walk in, immediately start a short academic task that's ready to go. No chaos, learning starts right away. TLAC 2.0 called this strong start. Then there's tight transitions, scripting and rehearsing moves between activities quick, quiet, orderly, minimal downtime. Later, this got folded into engineer efficiency, finding the fastest, simplest way for any routine. Lemov famously wrote about Bob Zimmerly, a teacher whose paper passing system was so automatic it saved like 63 hours of instructional time a year. That kind of example is a strong counter to critics who say it's demeaning or robotic. The point is respecting learning time.
And then managing behavior and attention. The aim is obviously a calm, orderly room, but without losing teaching time.
Exactly. The TLAC approach is built on clear expectations, preventing problems before they start, and using the least disruptive interventions possible. Think about SLANT or STAR. Instead of just saying pay attention, these acronyms teach what attention looks like. Sit up, listen, ask answer, nod, track the speaker. Or STAR might add respect. It breaks down attention into concrete actions you can teach, practice, reinforce. It clarifies what ready to learn actually means.
And what about 100%? That one's definitely well-known, maybe a bit notorious.
It really is. Originally, 100% meant 100% compliance 100% of the time, which understandably drew fire for sounding authoritarian. So TLAC 2.0 broke it down into 5 more nuanced strategies to get compliance, but with more finesse, less rigidity. Things like radar-based scene, looking, the teacher constantly scans, aware, nipping issues in the bud. Make compliance visible, quick, visible follow-through so expectations are crystal clear. Least invasive intervention using the quietest, quickest correction possible. A gesture, proximity, a quiet word. Minimal disruption. Firm, calm finesse, staying composed, respectful, but purposeful to get compliance without a fight. And art of the consequence, making consequences quick, predictable, incremental, and really importantly, depersonalized. Not about anger, just about the system.
And the idea of warm and strict feels like it ties that all together, finding that balance.
It really does. It tackles that tricky thing for new teachers. How can you be demanding and caring? Lemov says the best teachers are both. They build real relationships, show care, but they also hold kids to super high standards, academically and behaviorally, without backing down. This connects to positive framing. Correcting behavior by stating the desired future action, not harping on the past mistake. So instead of, Kiana, stop turning around, it's Kiana, I need your eyes this way, ready for what's next. It's about positive guidance towards success.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. Moving beyond just classroom management to actively shaping student thinking. How does Teachers, like a champion, try to maximize not just behavior, but actual cognitive engagement, making sure everyone is really thinking hard?
This is where Lemov introduces ratio. It covers both participation ratio, how many kids are joining in, and think ratio, how hard are they actually thinking. The techniques here are designed to shift the cognitive work from the teacher to the students, getting them to do the heavy lifting mentally.
And cold call is central to this, right? It sounds simple just calling on kids, but you're saying it's a game changer.
Oh, absolutely central. And you're right, it seems simple, but the impact is huge. It fundamentally changes the power dynamics. In a typical hands-up classroom, a few kids dominate, right? And the teacher's view of understanding can get skewed by those few volunteers. Cold call blows that up. By calling on students whether their hand is up or not, everyone becomes a potential participant. Everyone has to be ready. It creates universal engagement almost by default. It also plays into social motivation. TLAC 3.0 says motivation is social. Kids are motivated by the public nature of learning. When a teacher cold calls, they're publicly sampling the thinking across the room, making that usually invisible internal process visible. Techniques like show call then do the same for written work. So yeah, cold call is the engine. It drives engagement, gives real-time data, it lets the teacher manage the whole group's thinking. But again, there's that tension. It's powerful for teacher-managed cognition, but how does it balance with developing intrinsic motivation, self-directed inquiry? It's a tricky line to walk.
That's a really good point. For something meant to empower, that cold part could feel stressful. How does Lemov suggest teachers handle that, especially for kids who are maybe quieter or less confident?
Yeah, that's where the how becomes critical. Lemov stresses it has to be done in a warm, positive, predictable way. It shouldn't feel like a gotcha moment trying to catch someone out. It needs to be framed as normal, expected, an opportunity to shine. Good teachers often scaffold it. Start with easier, low-stakes questions to build confidence, make it routine, then gradually move to more complex stuff. Consistency and a supportive tone are key. Kids learn it's just how we learn here, and that struggling is okay, support is there.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So beyond cold call, what other techniques support this push for everyone thinking hard?
A really crucial one is wait time. The teacher deliberately pauses after asking a question, sometimes longer than feels natural at first, before taking an answer. That pause seems small, but it dramatically ups the quality of responses. It gives everyone, not just the quick thinkers, time to actually process and formulate a thought. It signals that deep thinking is valued more than just speed. Wrestling with the idea is encouraged.
Giving them that essential mental breathing room, not just pushing for impulse answers?
Exactly. Another key one added in TLAC 2.0 is turn and talk. It's structured pair discussion. Teacher asks a question, kids discuss it with a partner for a set short time. This massively increases participation. Pretty much everyone is talking and thinking at once, and it's low-stakes rehearsal. It builds confidence and makes kids much more articulate when they are then cold called to share their pair's ideas. Less pressure than being put on the spot alone.
And show call, also from 2.0, takes that idea of making thinking visible to written work.
Yes. With show call, the teacher walks around while kids are writing or solving problems, spots a strong example or even an interesting mistake, and puts it up on the document camera for everyone to see. It's powerful accountability. Kids know their work might be shared. And it provides a real-time, concrete model for the whole class to analyze, discuss, revise. It brings individual thinking out into the open, creating a shared standard of rigor.
Okay, let's shift gears and talk about how the book itself has changed over time. Because Teach Like a Champion isn't static, is it? It's evolved, engaged with critics, adapted to shifts in education. This seems like a really interesting story in itself.
You're absolutely right. The book's journey really tracks the no excuses charter movement's own evolution. Started with a strong focus on behavior and results, then moved toward more sophisticated academic rigor, and then really had to reckon with critiques about culture, equity, learning science. It's definitely a living document.
So TLAC 1.0 came out, 49 techniques, huge bestseller, lots of traction. But almost right away, people started saying it was maybe too focused on management, that it could lead to robotic students.
That's spot on. Critics felt it might stifle creativity, intrinsic motivation, even if it kept classrooms orderly. So Teach Like a Champion 2.0 in 2015 with 62 techniques was a direct response. Lemov acknowledged that perception, that some saw 1.0 as all about behavior. Version 2.0 was a deliberate rebalancing act, elevating academic rigor, deep thinking, to be just as important, if not more so, than management.
And how did that shift show up in the book itself, besides just adding techniques?
The biggest signal was the new structure. Instead of just a numbered list, 1.0 had, 2.0 introduced 4 organizing pillars. Check for understanding, academic ethos, ratio, and 5 principles of classroom culture. That wasn't just rearranging deck chairs, it was a conceptual shift. The most updated parts were all about the cognitive side of teaching, like the brand new Check for Understanding section. Techniques like reject self-report, getting teachers past everyone get it to real visible checks. And Show Me Kids actively showing understanding, often on whiteboards, all focused on making thinking visible, gathering data.
And the ratio pillar we talked about, that was part of this reframing too, moving beyond just kids participating.
Exactly. It wasn't just about hands up, it was about the depth of the thinking. TLAC 2.0 even added a whole new chapter on building ratio through writing. Techniques like art of the sentence, getting kids to synthesize complex ideas into one strong sentence, and show call, which we covered, a clear focus on writing as rigorous thinking. And maybe most directly aimed at the robotic student critique was formalizing culture of error, explicitly saying create a safe space for mistakes, normalize error as part of learning. That directly countered the idea TLAC demanded perfection. So overall, 2.0 was a definite pivot, moving from what felt like a control focus towards academic learning and understanding.
Okay, now this is where it gets even more interesting, I think. TLAC 3.0, tackling even bigger things.
Yeah.
The latest brain science and, crucially, those really complex, often charged conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI.
Yeah, TLAC 3.0 from 2021, 63 techniques. It's probably the most philosophically ambitious one. It really moves from just what works to trying to build a whole theory of why it works. The biggest change is a new intro chapter. 5 themes: mental models and purposeful execution. Lemov argues teachers need a clear mental model of how learning happens to use the techniques well. This chapter lays out that model, grounding the practices in 5 core principles, drawing heavily on cognitive and social science.
Can you unpack those 5 principles a bit? What's the gist of that scientific integration?
Sure. First, understanding human cognitive structure. It talks explicitly about limited working memory versus vast long-term memory. Brings in cognitive load theory. Second, habits accelerate learning. Framing routines not as control, but as ways to hack working memory, freeing up brain space. Third, what students attend to is what they will learn about, the teacher's critical role in directing focus. Fourth, motivation is social, arguing classroom norms, peer interactions are huge, often overlooked motivators. And fifth, teaching well is relationship building, saying strong relationships are built on kids feeling safe, successful, known within the learning, not as some separate add-on.
Wow. That sounds like a very deliberate move to address that long-running criticism about the lack of a traditional research base.
It absolutely is. Bringing in cognitive science like this tries to build a bridge, connecting the practices observed in uncommon schools with established research findings. It gives the techniques a new layer of academic justification. And at the same time, 3.0 confronts the equity critiques head-on. There's a new preface explicitly stating their beliefs about just and equitable classrooms. Discussions about TLAC and DEI are woven throughout. Some techniques were even renamed to clarify intent, avoid misinterpretation. Descriptions for key ones like no opt-out and cold call were rewritten to spell out the equity connection, framing them as empowering students.
So it's not just adding new stuff, but actively reframing, maybe re-narrating existing ideas to engage with those big external conversations.
Exactly. Plus more refinements, new techniques for background knowledge like retrieval practice, knowledge organizers, a new chapter on lesson prep. They even added keystone videos showing teachers blending multiple techniques smoothly, trying to counter that idea of just isolated tricks. It all adds layers of nuance, science, social awareness to a framework often knocked for lacking those things.
Okay, so taking all that into account, what does it really mean? The fact that TLAC is so widely used but also faces such intense, passionate criticism. These critiques seem to strike at the very heart of why we educate and what equity truly means.
This is where we hit those fundamental questions, right? What's school for? How do people really learn? What does equity look like in practice? These are the deep currents running under the TLAC debates. Understanding these philosophical clashes is key to why the discussion gets so heated.
Let's tackle the worker-learner critique first, the one about autonomy and creativity. The core argument being that TLAC's focus on routine, compliance, teacher direction, it ends up stifling creativity, critical thinking, independence, produces passive or robotic kids.
That's a major persistent criticism. Joanne Golan's term worker learner captures its students trained to self-monitor, wait for permission, defer to authority. Critics link this to specific techniques, the way slant prescribes posture or the 100% compliance idea, seen as leaving no room for individual expression or curiosity. Even no opt-out gets critiqued as just demanding parroting, not real understanding. Critics point to a part where Lemov calls a student's refusal to repeat an answer defiance. From this view, the whole system seems geared towards producing compliant workers, not innovative thinkers.
But proponents, Lemov included, push back hard on that. How do they counter the robotic student idea?
Their defense is both practical and cognitive. They argue structure and routine aren't enemies of creativity, they're prerequisites. It comes back to cognitive load. Automate the basics, free up working memory for the hard stuff, complex thinking, problem-solving, actual creativity. An orderly room isn't the goal itself, it's the necessary foundation for rigor and creativity to happen. Lemov is clear. Behavior stuff is a means to deep learning. Plus, they argue the robotic critique misunderstands the intent. Lemov calls it a toolbox, a recipe book, not a rigid script. He says the teachers he observed were diverse, adapted techniques to fit them. The goal is building a repertoire, not creating clones. So the tension often comes down to how it's implemented as a flexible resource or a strict top-down mandate.
Okay, connecting this to the bigger picture. Maybe the most profound charge against TLAC is about social and racial control, the equity question.
Yeah, this is a really serious charge, getting to the core of the no excuses philosophy. The critique is that TLAC, born from that movement, pushes a pedagogy of order and obedience mainly in schools serving low-income kids and kids of color. Critics like Golan sit a paradox, claiming to prep kids for college by teaching working-class norms, compliance, deference. While middle-class kids often succeed by being assertive, questioning things, the argument is it trains kids for subordinate roles, not empowerment.
So a mismatch between the skills taught and what's needed for real mobility and success in higher ed or professional life.
Exactly. Some critics draw really disturbing historical parallels, like to the Hampton idea in the 19th century, designed to keep Black Americans in certain roles. They might call TLAC a reboot of racist colonialist ideology, stripping kids of identity for test scores. It often links to a deficit view focusing on fixing student behavior, ignoring systemic issues like poverty, racism, implicitly blaming kids and families. Early editions not explicitly discussing racism was seen as evidence of this blind spot, making it complicit.
How has Lemov and the TLAC framework responded to these incredibly powerful equity critiques over time?
The response has definitely evolved. Initially, the defense was often that it's objective, non-ideological, just pragmatic tools to raise achievement, which is equity. Wendy Kopp of TFA endorsed it that way. But as the equity critique got louder and more nuanced, that wasn't enough. TLAC 3.0 is a direct engagement. That new preface on beliefs about just classrooms, framing techniques as empowerment, arguing self-discipline and hard work are love, equipping kids for an unjust world. He also frames access to effective, science-based instruction itself as an equity issue, something often denied to underserved kids. Now, the core debate for critics is this a genuine evolution, real reflection, or is it strategic rebranding to deflect criticism? That's the tough judgment call.
Okay, let's shift to the third major battleground, the evidence debate, especially the criticism about TLAC lacking traditional peer-reviewed research.
Yeah, this is dogged TLAC from the start. Critics say Lemov's method wasn't a controlled study. It was intense observation in a specific context, high-performing charter schools. Not necessarily representative, the initial evidence was often anecdotal or correlational, linking techniques to uncommons test scores, but without proving causation or ruling out other factors like student attrition, maybe, or unique charter freedoms. So from that academic perspective, TLAC sometimes gets dismissed as just gimmicks or tips without a solid research foundation.
So how do supporters defend its effectiveness against that charge? They must have a counter to the demand for traditional studies.
They do, resting on two main pillars. First, and always central, is the appeal to pragmatic, real-world results. They argue the best proof is the success of schools using it. High test scores, graduation rates, college acceptances for low-income, minority kids at Uncommon. To them, arguing about peer-reviewed studies is an ivory tower distraction from the urgent need to close achievement gaps now. Lemov often critiques education schools as too theoretical, disconnected from practice.
Mhm. And the second pillar, which seems stronger now, especially with TLAC 3.0.
That's the argument that the techniques work because they align with cognitive science. This is the explicit effort to connect observed practices to things like cognitive load theory, retrieval practice, working memory. The idea is the teachers Lemov watched intuitively hit upon practices that match how the brain actually learns best. This tries to bridge that gap between the practitioner's what works and the researcher's why it works. It gives the framework more academic legitimacy, broader explanatory power. This whole evidence debate really highlights a clash in education. The practitioner's pragmatism does it work versus the academic's empiricism. Can you prove why in a controlled way? Lemov kind of flips the usual script, starts with practice, then justifies it with theory.
Okay, let's zoom out now for some perspective. To really get to Champion, like a champion, we need to see where it fits in the bigger picture of educational ideas.
Yeah, understanding its ideological home is crucial. At its core, TLAC is all about direct, explicit instruction. Teacher-led lessons, clear procedures, systematic practice, measurable results that puts it firmly in the traditional camp, which often seems like the polar opposite of progressive, student-centered approaches that favor discovery, inquiry, open-ended projects.
So is it fair to see TLAC as a kind of modern Taylorism in schools? scientific management applied to teaching.
You can definitely see strong parallels, drawing on historical analysis like Larry Cuban's. Cuban sees TLAC as a modern version of the early 20th century efficiency-minded administrative progressives. Inspired by Frederick Taylor's industrial management, they were obsessed with efficiency, breaking teaching into measurable tasks, optimizing output like test scores. Lemov codifying teaching into 63 techniques, the focus on maximizing time, scripting transitions, it strongly echoes Taylorism. Efficiency, standardization, measurable output. Cuban calls Lemov a reemergence of this historical trend.
But there's a key difference, isn't there, between Lamar's stated goals and how Taylorism was historically used in schools. The purpose seems different.
Absolutely. That's a crucial distinction. Critics point out those early progressives often used efficiency for social sorting, reinforcing hierarchies, training kids for specific industrial roles. But the stated aim of TLAC and Uncommon Schools is the exact opposite, using efficient instruction to disrupt hierarchies, close achievement gaps, give all kids access to college and mobility. So while the methods might look like Taylorism efficiency, standardization, the professed goal, is radically different, framed as social justice. It's a fascinating tension.
Which raises a really important question. Is that whole traditional versus progressive fight, with TLAC stuck in one corner, actually a false dichotomy? Does it hold us back? Can these approaches work together?
A lot of people now are arguing exactly that it is a false dichotomy and an unproductive one. The idea is that direct instruction, like in TLAC and inquiry-based learning, aren't enemies. They can be, and maybe should be, complementary partners. From this view, TLAC techniques aren't against student-centered learning like PBL. They can actually provide the essential foundation, the knowledge, the skills, the habits that make those complex approaches possible.
Can you break that down a bit more? How does that synergy work, maybe thinking about cognitive science?
Well, it hinges on the difference between novice and expert learners. That's key in cognitive science. Novices, without much background knowledge, can get totally overwhelmed by pure discovery or open inquiry. They actually benefit more from clear guidance, explicit instruction. Experts, though, who already have a solid knowledge base and skills, they're ready for independent, self-directed, project-based work. So TLAC's structured, teacher-led techniques are seen as ideal for building that foundation, efficiently teaching core knowledge, vocabulary, habits. Techniques like cold call and write is right ensure mastery before kids move on. Once that foundation is solid, then students are truly equipped for complex, self-directed inquiry like PBL. Direct instruction in this model turns novices into experts ready for inquiry.
So it's a partnership, not a battle. Each approach doing a specific job in the learning process.
Exactly, and some schools are actually trying the synthesis, embedding TLAC techniques strategically within broader inquiry models. Even Lemov himself described visiting an exploration and inquiry-based school that was still full of the structures of great teaching, using TLAC tools to strategically give away the center of the classroom to the kids when appropriate. This suggests the smartest use of TLAC might not be as an all-encompassing system, but as a powerful tool for structure and direct instruction that ultimately enables more independent, student-centered learning down the line.
Wow. This deep dive into TLAC Kaparachuman really hammers home that even the most effective tools in education are rarely simple. They always come with complexities, trade-offs, important things to consider. It is, like we've said, hugely influential, complex, and deeply contested. It embodies those tensions we've explored. Toolbox versus ideology, liberation versus control, results versus research, rigor versus creativity.
A truly nuanced final take has to hold those seeming contradictions together. TLAC is a powerful system for explicit instruction and management. The evidence suggests, when done well, it can be very effective for measurable academic gains, especially closing gaps in high poverty settings where foundational skills might be weaker. But and it's a big but, those gains come with valid concerns about student autonomy, intrinsic motivation, cultural identity. TLAC's evolution, 1.0 to 3.0, shows a commendable effort to engage those critiques, bringing in cognitive science, addressing equity explicitly. Yet, that core tension between its teacher-directed mechanics and the goal of fostering independent, critical thinkers, that remains a live issue.
So for you listening, maybe you're a teacher, a leader, a researcher is just so fascinated by what makes teaching work. How should you approach this powerful, complex framework?
My thoughts aren't a simple yes or no, but more like guidelines for navigating it thoughtfully. First, understand the embedded ideology. TLAC isn't neutral. It has a philosophy about learning, about classrooms, about the purpose of school. You have to ask, does this align with my vision, my values? Second, adapt. Don't adopt wholesale. Rigid, top-down implementation is often where problems arise. Treat it like that recipe book Lemov mentions. Select, tweak, integrate techniques to fit your style, your kids, your subject. Don't demand blind fidelity. Third, intentionally balance with competing approaches. To counter the worker-learner risk, deliberately carve out time for student-led inquiry, PBL, creative work. Use TLAC for foundational building before shifting to more progressive models. Don't let it be the only approach. Fourth, prioritize the warmth and the why. TLAC can feel cold if done badly. Really emphasize the warm, strict idea, the joy factor. PD needs to focus on the reasoning behind techniques like cold call, not just the steps. Relationships, kids feeling safe, successful, known that's foundational, not optional. And finally, engage in ongoing critical reflection. Your job isn't done after you start using it. Constantly evaluate the impact beyond test scores. Look at school culture, student well-being, teacher morale. Ask the hard questions. Are we fostering critical thinkers or just compliant students? Are we affirming identities or asking kids to leave them at the door? Using powerful tools requires an equal commitment to asking these critical questions.
This deep dive really underscores that even the most effective educational tools are complex, with ripple effects far beyond the classroom. Given everything we've explored, the techniques, the philosophies, the evolution, how might your understanding of good teaching shift? And what new responsibilities does that place on you in your own learning or how you engage with education?
What's fascinating, really, is that the conversation about teaching is never finished. It's always evolving, asking us to blend new insights with practical wisdom and, well, basic humanity. And that's definitely a journey worth taking.